buenas dan half a day gua husikan conception bini bebe you interview sti I tilita unus tagi veterano gi geran Vietnam malafanza beu na paranayo na zata hanana guatu buenas dan half a day Mr. Veterano Johnny buenas dan half a day how are you?
Oh, half a day todo malik.
Todo malik. Malafan na until kita tutuhon no sti interview before we start this interview. Malafan go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, and all this good stuff. And I will open the floor for you, like right now.
Okay, my name is Johnny Chargualaf, and Toto Gomo, Lumafdago, PT. The best year around in movement from PT to Tamuning in 1950. Best Musquela to high school, graduate is at Tumon High School back then. And then from there, Mono, Payasan Lago, Kulehu, Best Pumarado, Kumulehu, Best Matu Papetu, getting a selective service na Pabemagraph. Anyway, o disobeyed po sa mga papa gi recruiting stations o sign up po for volunteer ho instead draft was this in 1966 model mo esta retire to gi December 1990.
Kasi no model mo gi militar no sa no umakti pa mo ginin ni selective service puri bibugo igera gi papa gi sa Vietnam lo undecidi pronado pun voluntario instead, right? You went into
that's right. Volunteer, yeah.
Yeah. Lo often nu Johnny often nu often umepo ka peron halung di militar. Utungwa na wana ba natin sinons kapag sa i-draft no. Lo gi na somo often na voluntario rather than go to the draft.
Yes, well, you look for the moon for the draft lane, the best is a volunteer who's up for the escape in the Pabimanahono of Vietnam.
Oh,
so at the model, you took first assignment Manano for Germany. The assignment in the Matuzu, Germany, as well. No, if I got there, ammo done. The time we got there, so no 2 on 4 off. For the last 8 months, because anyway, it's the no tired to Nezu or Suno Nezu. Was more normal, so I think the first sergeant, Tamadu, no Tadigu sila lugar, kasi dala ina no pun volunteer pa Vietnam, pus sa ngani na kanagata behasufan just inalda, pus primer dia o modong taki do faisin do sa kanil ko bongi form so fill out the form kasi the monaldang is form tada a week later for English I'm on my way to Vietnam.
Malata na Clara, this is the US Army, right?
That's right, US Army.
The US Army. Kasi bumaluntario, it's also the US Army. Okay,
that's right.
Given na lugar estom sangana nanu humano para Alemania, which is Germany.
Yeah.
So nu often only experience mo given now tunga sta you brief that a little bit on sangana so briefly gi amo dam gi gatigi sa Alemania. Zan nu kalanti no di mago fa gi ato zan na bumaluntario para Vietnam lo malada ta segon mo na often na onyo na humalama often na sakta na humalama gita Vietnam
1968 1969 that is Tabo Vietnam Tabo Germany in 1967 it's a most actually mo na lekon na ba may volunteer biyano pa Vietnam pasali esta also no Germany sa it's a like that so but then one day I'm done the was paningin Germany to subo sa Jabaligi which has given mo na lekon na pa the volunteers of biyano pa Vietnam.
Pues gi basic training is that at the Fort Ord, no?
No, my basic training is Fort Lewis, Washington.
For those.
Yeah, 18 weeks especially manado nungi no pa forward for AIT. Just from there again manano pa Germany manado nungi so advanced individual training is a forward.
Apa tu nu Johnny temu advanced individual training temu AIT makanan. Apa temu AIT?
7018, which is supply and logistics.
Pues malada ta hanamo na no in 1968 and moto gato Vietnam sa voluntario. Often a diferencia di pun voluntario pero nano para Vietnam jana di kumutegi ma-assign au gato Vietnam. Wagi na diferencia.
Mars doko sansa ni pabeba na ono ni modern after the unit na lago.
Oh, okay.
Ale Molanzo Vietnam.
Jane pag-umalumao gano janu sa undingu guahan no. Jane pag-umalumao gano di United States Army. After na class incidenti jani ne di matulay ka to di yurizata no. Everything has changed, lifestyle and the whole bit in English no. What was going through your mind being a young man and taking on something like this? Nadipura outfit nagi linalamo, for your life, the changes. What kind of feeling often at class in nasudu mahal di often has to be na tempo na di you were out to conquer the world or it's a brand new life. It's English is very interesting. What's in our minds, but that's all we,
Yeah, and they stabo Vietnam it's muna hasru ko be sarga militar or be hujum. Because anyway, utulakan so ko dekanga the best be sarga sa anu mono tatigi sa Amerika muna no gizo kultur. There's nothing outside. It's a bulan man protest the US like it's like the big extent they really so the army. But anyway, I was in country for 6 months. So we decided na pabi asaga. Usumano pagwam mo R&R. And that's again durante ni mo R&R no again yung masaga ho. The day after, Manao tati Vietnam. Usa ni matutu tati Vietnam. Sige ne wasu lekulano kumati mapuno gini. I hope na mumutuga ako na. Sa Estabo Vietnam, look for the English, I faced 4 tet offensive. I don't know if you know what those campaigns are, but those campaigns are each campaigns, the Vietnamese or the Viet Congs, they just went all out. You'd be hearing all kinds of guns firing, mortar rounds incoming, those are the types that you hear on those and it will go on for days. And I was that really scared me when I was there, but there was a bunker that we built there, and that's the one that we usually run into for our protection. And during those campaigns also, every morning around 1 a.m., that's the time when the incoming mortar rounds will hit our compounds. And I would sleep with one eye open. I would sleep with my weapons all the time because you never know when they're gonna overrun our base or what. So anyway, that's my my experience there in Vietnam.
Dani, the experiences, one being in a, in a hostile situation, kita gano, apa mas tardong someone that's in nine on falefa. Gua uno na sa segmento, is there a particular event that stuck in your mind all these years since you've retired in 1990? Distene remiterawo di 1990. Nasakan na di parona haswa tori tempo di pago ni retirawo and you're living the retired life, rightfully so. Lo guahasan nu experience mo na di sen tablong di alum I person mo dyan yung nahasun ni dinain ng palipat.
إذا مش بدنا نقول أنا استعملوا فيتنام لكتايزي بما باكي زي ما طيب سبقت موجي لأي US but anyway I forget to know maswa hasul di incoming motor rounds di mas mana no dan silo ne the forget to know anesthesia pwede i-doctor lang no malilifahin na estalo. Lana, that was 50 some years ago, and you forget things, you know. So it's you pasa de si pogo na tempo si flashbacks and the PTSD na post traumatic stress disorder. Because ganabay may gozo no man bifizo kasi sigyo mamotik sa esto padiniti sa go. Anyway, it's not much fun no like that. Be mata Vietnam.
The aji gikan predict ko ni siya ba asata siya tao itaw tahan man staba Vietnam dyan aji tim aji itaw ta na umalyan na aji experience siya sa masya hafan no official mo tsaka supply clerk ko masya tsaka infantry yo kumugayo gigi tagano na lugar aji hostile place ni the senior un determina hafa para masusedi you don't know what's going to happen next no Johnny lo mano gato gi sa Vietnam na estaba
assign mo gi 18th Engineer Brigade but attached to the 9th Infantry Division is a long time Vietnam that's on the Mekong Delta.
Oh,
and estaba so anyway yeah he actually Doku assignment is kind of a unique you know I was there for a year with 4 tail offensive campaign and to be honest with you I never fired my weapon so I was one of those lucky person and I never saw combat or face to face with the enemy.
Lloyd Stabogi and a Teioki, Finimanamkun, and a Teioki hostility forces or hostile Makeke Manafanu Hamzuni, Tropani Americano. Stabogi and Matagatu, si Gubenu Carlos Kamatu.
Yeah, no, Stabazu no, this Mekong Delta ne Matusi Governor Kamatsu Logagi up north and Mansita was the place I never got a chance to see him. I was actually hoping to see him because my wife's mother are sisters with his wife.
Oh.
So I never got to meet him anyway. Pamilyang Godzu.
Pamilyang Godzu Paris, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Este na kustonya di lagnya gunino danggit manayo tansa para untutuhun de nuevo ko humaluma omon militar. In other words, if you were given the chance to start all over, would you have done the same thing and going into the military, volunteering rather than getting drafted? Sige kustonya ni mafafaisin ni.
Yeah.
Para tayo honesty gihin na someone would you start all over? If you had to start all over, would you still do the same thing?
To be honest with you, no, I don't think I would do the same thing because I'm done with it. Let the young ones take over. So I'm done. I'm retired. I'm living a good life. And like I said, let the young ones take over.
Ane humutungo gi balitat gi ane unding Vietnam so tungo na unsang na nanu gwini size message sa ogwi nu malak so lo paron hano tatigwahan para un asaba pesong biro tati Vietnam lo un extendi durante sinagamo Vietnam, right?
ahi no adzike ne stabaho ne mano tati ne manazano masaga no urin lisu Vietnam sa pudi and urin lisu gadok urin lis min bonus. And you look for English that will give me a start in life when I go back to the mainland. And it sure did. When I left Vietnam, I was so glad, because I did, because I was alive. We got to Fort Ord with my wife, and we started our life there, buying all the necessity for when we moved into our quarters, like buying new furniture, a new car, and what have you. So that really gave me a good start.
That's a great incentive in English, and di pun tutuhon ni nuevo na familia, no?
It is, yeah.
You hardly see them because of the mere fact that you're over in a foreign country fighting the war. Logi, hafaduna sinenti. This is just hafaduna sinenti di infin hung zungaw ginagera. Sen magufal sa timapuno. Linihan mo lo di ni makpo adzu sa untutuhon ni nuevo na linala a new life with the wife. Timanaw tatiaw guahan na manaw bataw di Fort Ord like mo ani mas station og ani makpo og sa Vietnam, right? Like
yeah, neodingo Vietnam matuzog station. That was a good feeling, fresh air and everything. Back with the land with the doorknob, round doorknob. So anyway, my station no forward. So about 3 years. And ibon natin gi madagaw pa Germany. Pag sa konya to di familiar ko pa Germany. Dos guy di mano pa Germany. This my station no gi East Coast. Dos guy hilokwi. Toby Hanna Army Depot and Aberdeen, Maryland. And my station no. This my station no Hawaii. This my station no Korea. And I'm no Korea. San Francisco Presidio posted in my station for 5 years. Yes, estaba pa be continue na ito ko career sa no malago to pa be ma-promote talo na. No, esta madong kulifa magoon. Like that, that we don't want to leave our friends behind. So I made a decision to that's how I got stationed in Korea, because I can be stationed there for 1 year on a company tour. And I was stationed in Tanducham with the 2nd Infantry Division there. So I was stationed there for 1 year. Then I came back, and that's when I decided to go ahead and throw in the towels, because the family doesn't want to move anywhere anymore.
Just maulik sinatbihaw ni militar tagi un setbi militar no ni para un mumuti.
Yeah, I would say that being in the military is actually is a security blanket for me, and it personally monalza no umuzungo gi militar ni retire to the Matoto gi University of California San Francisco. Because anyway, what's the preference ni hiring preference with up the veteran. There's Matoto gi Dunya warehouse. I worked there as a warehouse manager for 20 years. There's Muritaro Talo. There's Gayo di retired. There's Limonaldo no retired in movie family ko papa getting is the Long Beach after 29 years in Bay Area, South San Francisco. Kasi siya pa ako na tournament in Long Beach.
That's fantastic. That's a good story. Lo gwinigi uno na question na bebe office no kalo. John ST prajiman offer senior na mensahe. What kind of message would you give mas manhobinsitu siya na veterano or the active duty siya pa gani manggagaya gisibisyo na klase na taw-tawin ni taw-tawtan ni Samoro. Offer mo na klase mensahe, or what kind of message would you
is that
advice that you've given?
Is that bisa nga ni siya na ito ko believe na malay na fan haulong gisibisyo for the duration of what, 2-4 years to get the skill. And if they like it, stay. If they don't, they get out. But being in the military, it gives you skill, and then you make it a career and be like me. I retired, I worked again, retired again, and then I'm drawing 4 pensions. My Army retirement, my Social Security, my UCSF retirement, and disability.
Oh my Lord. Wow.
So I want to let them know that, in order to live comfortably, you have to work hard for, to get those incentives.
Dia bela te fatu tsui no. Ang malago ni adso ang ginadzigit manalago mo lo.
Right. Tisina gumagawa. You never get there.
No, not in the military until you get there lo. Ang mga skills and ni discipline no. Ni nayon ni peron sugon mo na dinalo mo. It's
right. That's important. Is the discipline. Yeah.
Lo malafan sa tabiray tatino i giran Vietnam ni ti toli tempuluan na sa tuntungo na napohalami incoming phenomenal motor rounds or whatever it may be ang giman hujung full force gi estabaw ni na lugar di isinenti wi ni tuntungo ko parang farmata gupa parai nani kan you sinon speaker di na jun klasin sinenti na di afa bidadamo ne jipun na suha jogi na somu masaya pagritirawo lo utungua na bentik wa hadi di na somu tori tempo kagege alji experience mo gati gi Vietnam ni man mamatay i tao to girizam
at gilelay an estabo bi no 22 anos sao so anyway gila tempo in English, I don't look at those things or think of it. That's what I'm trying to say. Is I don't think of those. I just live it day by day, and just to stay alive.
Logi posisyon niya sa pudino 6 meses sa Vietnam za undisidi por un biro totiguahan para un asagwa. Za masti finatu tsomo para i minari ki familia za nu lani semoli kanu na klase ni nasuno da jigi na un non decidi na punsaga gisit bisu sa pudi kwahas tanu mas responsibly para hagu para i familia lo malik kanu sa nu no na klase ni nasuno bentimu parewa no dyan mas often a career choice no ni
actually an estabo Vietnam ni ska masya mono baktu no piligro sa especially at Poigny no for English they're so brave but they come out at nights and they're so chicken during the day the best you don't know who is who and which is which whether they're Viet Cong or the regulars so that's kind of puzzling you never know who is the enemy there.
Walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
You never know, right?
Right.
Malado be office no talos ti contento ako no ni man matratan mizo ni ibeterano. Utungan ay tratamento gigatu sa Vietnam kalanu John Mensaya stigila taftat you explain a little bit of this. You touch on this a little bit because of all the protests that were happening about the Vietnam War. Lo gi militar na banda na gi tratamento para hagu no malika mo na zona klase tratamento gi mafatu gi hinasom gi corazon mo your treatment from the military as to what you're doing. Were you relatively satisfied or is there something there that's not really up to your liking?
Oh yeah, ngan satisfied so this kali antisa di Beijing Vietnam 3 months before Zumami unit in Mufan para Bang Tao. That's an area R&R area for in-country R&R for the military. So anyway, I feel safer there. Sapudi, it's an R&R center, so there's a lot of security there too. So 3 months there, and then that's when I left Vietnam after that. And I came home, and as we landed and got off the plane, all I hear of people chanting baby killers and things like that. They were protesting, so I just ignored it. I didn't pay attention to it. I just went on with my own, to my next duty station, and just say, forget those people. They got nothing better to do, so I got my own life to live.
Matotati guahan unding mo Vietnam?
No.
Tunga naman ako
Again,
America.
yeah, matututati guam do pick up yasabao sa nilayo sa manawang magino states president ni station no forward. Sa pudi I'm a Vietnam veteran that I'm a station no forward. We had priority in moving into government quarters. So the day we got to forward, I moved right into quarters. So that was a good, incentive for me.
Ata na tratamento ni militar na personnel, military personnel, whether it be Marines or Army, Air Force, that was involved physically over at in Vietnam, where you have the protests happening over there. Pertetesta na plus taw-tawi, mafananan ng baby killers, of course yan plus in naan. Lo, adto no papaisunaw na estino Johnny sa pudi po na kumpara adzi mampertetesta gano takti dyan adzi anay mato magi guahan parang kun niya sa guamo antes yung biro takti Amerika guahan diferensya no ni tamano matrataw anay tumunukaw gibat ko nairi ni familia dyan ni pumalo siya natotobahan sa ti pareho may I assume that it's not the same as the what the protesters are doing back there compared to the propaganda.
Yeah, it's entirely different coming home to Guam, being welcomed with from your family, and it's a good feeling. But when I came back to move to the States, that's when things just went totally different. Hearing those chanting baby killers and things like that. But like I said, I ignore those remarks.
Afamon nanu adjun masasangan I baby killer. Afadunu sumugun mo na what started all that? Ba siya bula siya na opinion padisti I Giram Vietnam binatempo. Lo afadun nanu afamas nu sumunik mo na dun na paratay nu hinasunya ito America could be Giram Vietnam. After one day in the summer, I'm asking the personal.
Yeah, it's up to Istanbul, Vietnam. The radio station AFN again, AFN radio station in Vietnam. Manus taken put army raid the village. The French they killed everybody in that village, including babies, and I think that's what got started it because that news came back to the mainland, and like I said, I believe that's what started this chanting of baby killers. And there was one popular Lieutenant Cali that was in the big news when I was there about him, massacring a whole village. And that was really popular back in the States. And like I said, that's another thing that brought those, chanting baby killers.
Because I'm doing my Estados Unidos, you are the face of that Lieutenant Cali guy. I guess nasunyan na will represent
That's right. They think that we represent him, but actually not.
Yeah, utungwa na got nothing to do with that. So to get it to lolani like adzi basiga bumiraw tapi higi sa zauna bebay tungu ala stin sa tentu pemalisyan na tauto ni tiningo nasunian adzi perung gigi war zone mafanana no adzi jatun tungu depusi si não identifica haji inimigo. You cannot really identify your enemies because the country is divided between north and south, but it does not take away their physical look and stuff like this. But tuntungo haji si não trust no in English. The sinantin ini ji ani haji stina tauto haji stina padgun ko ginin hilo pat ginin papa. Janu guana baina nu na jiperon hasune anzu lani ni na fangu kufiau sampai ni tisinaw mamay go ang poingi gano anay stable got gi lugar ni stable the tori tempo na atana looking over your shoulders in English no ni afaparo what's going to happen next digilan de kulo anzu na class incidenti us pipiasa masya sibitaw pat masya no militato debia du guan di no ang duluah na kita gano na klase ni tuntungo haji du pursi enemigo who's going to come in and ruin your day te gano na klase lo tinafekto niya zona klase incidenti utunga na unsangan na no
no que effective les recta hobilo vi 22 anos da animatudo vi no gubatsugo dani doku supply sergeant the grizzlies doku supply sergeant está no labana Vietnam he's been exposed to the environment, so I stuck with him and he gives me advice be on the lookout for this and that and be prepared at all times. I had my weapon with me all the time, but like I said, I never fired a round when I was there. And like I said, I was lucky. And I never think about, facing combat because I was there. And if I have to do it, I have to do it.
You're 22 on yourself. It's, you just deal with it.
You have no fear.
It's to the point where we sa hago ni voluntario peron hanu pada Vietnam, you know what you're getting yourself into kasi parang mai sa no physically and mentally ni alpha para umfana mo na, you know what you're going to be facing as you go along. Udah no alpha pago retirao fully retired tao tres na pension nilaleg mo no receive pago gini ni ititso mo todo gi sibit na banda ni militar mo.
Semi-retired pago. So work is not in my vocabulary anymore because I'm fully retired.
Rightfully so. Ganda dia mo guys no tamiresi no na klase ni nasusa ko di i dupursimo na ni. Lani like lo adzi i manay namu ne moto tapik wa hanzalig mo no muzungo Vietnam rock to saput bebeo asagwa afa monsinente ni familia gui pues gi después un sangani talo na angin muzungo Vietnam pun foto tati za pun konya familia za pun fan but you're going to move back to the States
mas bersangani zo pabedai zo dan sesama dan si kantan zadi sebelah ni penigera Vietnam. Jadi mas mula kada waktu kada ugu kesa na asu Vietnam.
Gano di either dandan or inasu no di pun asu Vietnam. Adi siya i maniluta no ni Dumingwit maski 67 fanan tau fanan mas tau buahan ni sacrificio ni linala niya, they sacrifice their life para juga tu na gera. Gua siya gwitin mo no Johnny na tau Domingo
no ulua lai tugo si dosit kasito tatawa marke matay Vietnam si Ronald ipabalu tugo malag mo kada mo tuzo guam talta no manaigis sa todo ko high school buddies
lo malata na klaro tato tamuni nga antes yun naling militar no
tato tamuni nga
Singatan na no na nu na klase ta jige fanan nu umujung na matungin na dos na nu pemerintah sa nu pudisi na nomoni conception na pizza dunia antes juar sagwa. Kasi ano dekai no anuk na magait na nu permit graduate dan si tatahu na pinadentes pues gracias a Dios. Lo afa mas talo sinya un sangan put I experience mo no Johnny ni sinya ta avaju ta document fining litera para iman mamaila sa tempo.
And also right no like the Izoko Saimingwi it's like it's very unique. Like I say, I never had to face combat or the enemy face to face. So I mean, there's fear whenever you go into a place like that. So, I don't know, to each his own.
To each its own. Pues, donc luna si dus mga sila ni unahin estina tempo para interview ni Johnny estina no na interview sa sempre no marikokor pa gusti mentas kumekuntasit na dos sa estina interview sa no it's gonna be here forever estina interview kasi gin mamela na tempo sa tayo na dos siya demi batunis sina madami batunis na may kung estina interview ni experience mo lo gimas no experience mo no ginin ni corazon mo dan you know your way of thinking kun ariklan maiso
dan tiba pareho todo you know I audition interview tiba pareho isinente mami ni of an experience Vietnam everybody's different of things
again magahit no dadto na no estina programa ni tatsobi paguno you're one of the few ni pro ma-interview na para talia todo na klasen experience gi taw-tawta ni man sabi gi sa ganigera. Kasi yuto mo ben ayaw no your last word afata lumas para un sangat gwini antes dita huzo mi programa.
Like todo zizo ku kamra si tiban motto no just thank you for their service and God bless them. And everyone that is on active duty right now to thank you for your service.
Bless Johnny, a big thank you, a large appreciation, and you know your participation in this program to push forward what we would know about our own people, and for instance, whether in one of the wars that was fought. Against actually the United States, if you will. Pues daklon na si dos masi janu sempre talo kumekontesit gi tiap mam na tempo. Para di dokumento ni necesita ta fit mazan ta diskuti no. Pues stigi si Johnny Chargualaf to Long Beach, California. Janu san maguf sa motto magufo lokwe sa nu motto para ita. Ni para ta diskuti experience niya ginigigeran ni Vietnam para project.
And I thank you. I thank you too as well, and I hope that this interview will benefit somebody.